She always liked being on top of him in the other room, sitting on his desk, on the counter, on the arm of his chair, looking down at him like he was the safest place in the world. He thought she was just playful. He didn't know she was trying to memorize his face before time took her away. Subscribe to the channel right now because it only gets deeper from here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. Ji-hoon Park had a rule about his spare room. Nobody goes in there. Not the landlord. Not his old friends from the entertainment company he walked away from. Not even his mother, who still called every Sunday to remind him that quitting was a mistake and that 31 was too old to be starting over in a Hyundai apartment that smelled like old recording cables and instant noodles. Nobody. The spare room was his studio, his corner of soul, the one place where the version of him that hadn't completely fallen apart still lived. Then Amara Johnson knocked on his door on a Tuesday. She was standing in the hallway with 2 massive suitcases, a camera bag strapped across her chest, and a smile so wide it looked like it belonged somewhere warmer than Seoul in March. She was from Atlanta originally, she told him quickly, though she'd been living in Lagos with her aunt before getting the scholarship to study fashion photography at Hanguk University. "You're the music producer guy, right?" she said, not even waiting for him to answer. "The ad said quiet neighborhood. This IS quiet. I like it." Ji-hoon looked at her suitcases, then at her camera bag, then at the way she was already looking past him into the apartment, like she was measuring it with her eyes. "The room is small," he said. "I've slept in smaller," she told him. He probably should have said no, but his rent was 3 months behind, and the entertainment company he'd left, or been pushed out of, depending on who was telling the story, wasn't sending any more checks. So he stepped aside, and Amara Johnson walked into his carefully organized life like she had already decided it belonged to her. By the end of the first week, she had rearranged the kitchen spices alphabetically, put a small succulent on the bathroom shelf, and learned that Ji-hoon only ate plain rice when he was stressed, which, apparently, was most days. She was loud, not in a rude way, in the way that people are loud when they've never been told to be quiet. She sang while she cooked. Not Korean songs, not even American pop songs. Old Yoruba songs her aunt used to hum, mixed with whatever was playing in her earphones. She danced between the kitchen and the living room like the floor was something to celebrate. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. Ji-hoon found it overwhelming. He also found himself standing in the hallway sometimes, just listening. But the thing he noticed most, the thing he couldn't quite explain, was where she liked to sit. Not on the couch, not in the chair. She sat on things. On the kitchen counter while waiting for water to boil. On his desk while scrolling through her photos. On the arm of the studio couch when she wandered in to ask him a question. Always above him. Always looking down with that expression that said she found the whole world slightly amusing, including him. Especially him. "You can't keep coming in here," he told her one afternoon, when he found her sitting on top of the studio monitor speakers, eating an orange and watching him work. "You left the door open," she said simply. "I was getting water." "Door was still open," she shrugged. He wanted to argue, but she offered him a piece of orange, and somehow the argument disappeared. The studio, his private room, the place where nobody was supposed to go, slowly started having her fingerprints on everything. Literally. Orange juice on the edge of the mixing board, a hair tie left on the keyboard, the faint smell of whatever shea butter she used sitting in the air long after she'd gone to bed. Then the blackout happened. It was a rainy Wednesday night in April. The electricity went out across half of Hongdae around 9 p.m. Ji-hoon lit 2 candles. Amara appeared in the studio doorway holding her phone flashlight and a bag of honey butter chips. "Can I sit in here?" she asked. "My room feels like a cave." He moved his notebook. She climbed onto the studio couch and sat cross-legged, the candlelight making the room feel smaller, warmer than it actually was. They talked for 4 hours. About music, about photography, about what it felt like to leave the place you grew up in and land somewhere that speaks a completely different language. Amara talked about Lagos and Atlanta and how she could never fully belong to either one. Ji-hoon talked about the entertainment company, something he hadn't told anyone in over a year, about how they took his music, gave it to another producer, and called it a creative direction change. "That's terrible," she said quietly. "It's business," he said, like he'd rehearsed it. No, she said. It's terrible. You can say that. He looked at her. She was sitting above him on the arm of the couch, the candle throwing soft light across her face, and she was looking at him the way people look at things they're trying to memorize. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, Ji-hoon laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite kind. The kind that starts in your stomach. When the electricity came back, Amara slid off the couch arm, stretched, and walked toward the door. She paused, turned back, and looked at him sitting there with his notebook and his candles. You look cute, she said, smirking. When you look up at me. Then she was gone. Ji-hoon sat alone in the studio for a long time after that. Then he opened a fresh page in his notebook and started writing. Now, if you're enjoying the story already, subscribe to the channel right now because it only gets deeper from here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. He wrote for 3 hours that night. Not a finished song. Just words. Fragments. Things she'd said and the way she'd said them. The image of her sitting above him on the studio monitor, eating an orange like she owned the whole afternoon. He didn't know what to call it yet, but it was something. And something, after a year of nothing, felt enormous. He didn't notice the small orange prescription bottle on the studio shelf until 2 days later. It must have fallen out of her bag. He set it on the kitchen counter without reading the label. She pocketed it quickly when she saw it, said nothing, and went back to singing. He didn't think about it again. Maybe he should have. The thing about living with someone is that you learn their rhythms before you learn their secrets. Ji-hoon learned that Amara woke up at 6 a.m. every single day, no alarm, like her body had made a private agreement with the sun. He learned she photographed everything. The steam rising from her morning coffee. The crack in the kitchen wall that looked vaguely like a river. His hands on the mixing board when he thought she wasn't looking. She said it was practice. She said a photographer had to train her eye every day or it went soft. He believed her. He didn't question the camera. He also learned she had one specific way of watching him work. She'd climb onto the arm of the studio couch, always that specific spot, pull her knees to her chest, and just sit there, not talking, just watching him layer sounds and delete them and layer them again. Sometimes she'd hum along with something that was still unfinished, like she could already hear where it was going. How do you know what note comes next? He asked her once. She shrugged. I just feel where it wants to go. He stared at her. You've never studied music. I've never studied music, she agreed, smiling. He shook his head, but he kept the note she hummed. By May, their evenings had a shape. Amara would finish her classes and come home with photographs to sort through. Ji-hoon would be in the studio, headphones around his neck, surrounded by scribbled notebooks. Around midnight, one of them would start heating up ramen, usually her, because she discovered he could burn water, and they'd eat at the studio table, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her dreams. She wanted to show her work in New York. In Paris, she wanted photographs that made people feel something they didn't have a word for yet. He told her about the kind of music he wanted to make. Quieter than what the company wanted. More honest. Less manufactured. Play me something, she told him one night. It's not finished, he said. Play it anyway. He hesitated, then played her 40 seconds of something he'd been building since that rainy blackout night. Just piano. Just space. She didn't say anything for a long time after it ended. Ji-hoon, she finally said quietly. What? Don't you dare let anyone change that. He looked at her sitting above him on the couch arm, her ramen getting cold beside her, completely serious. And something in him shifted, something that had been tight and locked for a very long time. He started going out more because of her. That was the other thing. Amara had an inability to stay indoors on weekends that he found irritating at first and then completely contagious. She dragged him to Jingbakgung Palace on a Saturday morning, made him rent one of the traditional hanboks at the gate, and spent 2 hours photographing him looking deeply uncomfortable among tourists. You look like you're being held against your will, she laughed. I am, he said flatly. Smile, Ji-hoon. He almost did. They went to the Noryangjin fish market on a Sunday, and she pointed at things she couldn't name and made him translate with expressions of complete horror or delight, depending on what it was. She found a little paper crane vendor near Insadong and bought him one without explaining why, just pushed it into his jacket pocket and kept walking. He kept it on the studio shelf. At a fashion event in June, one of her university exhibitions. Ji-hoon went because she mentioned it twice and pretended she hadn't. The gallery was an Itaewon, full of students and faculty, and people who dressed like they were making a statement about something. He stood near the back in his plain gray hoodie, feeling completely out of place. He heard it. Two women, faculty guests, looking at Amara's photographs on the wall and speaking in low voices about how interesting it was that the scholarship had gone to someone from outside the region, and whether the work was really sophisticated enough for the program. Ji-hoon didn't think. He just walked over. Her work, he said clearly, is the most honest thing in this room. The women looked at him. He didn't move. I've worked in music production for 10 years. I know what it looks like when someone has something real. She has it. They said nothing. They moved away. Amara appeared at his elbow 3 minutes later. What did you say to them? Nothing important, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Ji-hoon, let's get food, he said, already walking. But she caught his sleeve. Just for a second. And when he turned, the way she was looking at him made everything in the room go quiet. That night in the studio, sitting in the low lamp light with the city noise coming through the window, everything spilled over. She told him she'd seen what he said to them, that nobody had done that for her before. Not like that, not without making it about themselves. He told her she deserved 100 people saying it. She told him she only needed one. You've taken over every room in my life, he said quietly. She didn't laugh this time. And that was the night everything changed between them. He started noticing other things, though. Small things he probably should have asked about sooner. The way she'd go quiet after laughing too hard. Like her body needed a moment to catch up. The voice notes she recorded alone in her room when she thought he was asleep. He could hear her soft voice through the wall, but never the words. The question she asked him one night out of nowhere, sitting on the studio counter eating strawberries. Hey, she said casually, if someone just disappeared suddenly. Like, not a fight, just gone. Do you think love stays behind after they leave? He looked up from his notebook. Why are you asking that? She popped a strawberry in her mouth. Just thinking. He watched her for a moment. Yes, he said. I think it stays. She nodded slowly. Didn't say anything else. He told himself she was being poetic. She was always saying things like that. Beautiful, strange, sideways things that made him think for hours afterward. Some people only get one beautiful season, she told him another time, looking out the studio window at the summer rain. He thought she was talking about love, about the two of them, about how rare this kind of thing was. He thought he understood what she meant. He didn't. Summer in Seoul turned into fall, and fall brought colder things than weather. Ji-hoon's mother called on a Sunday morning in September. He was in the kitchen making coffee when she asked, too carefully, too quietly, if it was true that he was living with someone. A foreign girl. Someone had apparently seen them at the Jinbokgung Hanbok photos Amara had posted, Ji-hoon in the background, laughing at something off camera. His mother didn't yell. She never yelled. She just went quiet in a specific way that was somehow worse. Ji-hoon, she said. I just want you to think about what you're doing. I am thinking, he said. You're still healing. You're not in a good place to. I'm fine. A foreign girl who's only here temporarily. Mom. She stopped. Then she said, I just don't want you to get hurt again. He told her he had to go. He set the phone down and stood at the kitchen counter for a while. Amara was still asleep. He could hear the city outside. He looked at the paper crane on the shelf through the studio doorway. Then 3 weeks later, Amara came home from her university meeting with a folder of papers and sat down at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a long time. There's an opportunity, she said finally, in Paris. A fashion editorial internship. 3 months. Real publications. It would be huge for my portfolio. Ji-hoon looked at the folder. Then at her. When? January. That's soon. Yeah, she said. She wasn't looking at him. The same week, his former label reached out. Not the company that had pushed him out. A different one, smaller, more genuine, offering him a production contract. Real creative control this time. But it meant long studio hours, meetings, a completely rebuilt schedule. They should have celebrated both things. Instead, the apartment got quieter. Amara started going to bed early. Ji-hoon stayed in the studio later. The 2 a.m. ramen stopped. The dancing in the kitchen stopped. The way she used to appear in the studio doorway and just lean there, watching him with that warm expression, that stopped too. He told himself she was stressed about the Paris decision. He told himself they were both adjusting to new pressures. He told himself a lot of things. But one Thursday night he walked past her room and heard her voice, that familiar murmur of her recording voice notes, and something in it sounded different. Lower. More urgent. Like she was trying to get things into words before they slipped away. He didn't knock. He should have knocked. The distance kept growing. Small things started feeling like arguments. One night in the studio she said something about how music could outlive everything, outlive people, outlive the moments it was made in, and instead of hearing it the way he used to, as one of her beautiful sideways things, he heard it as her telling him something was ending. "Why does it feel," he said, setting his headphones down, "like you're already leaving me?" She looked at him. Something moved across her face that he couldn't quite read. "I'm right here," she said. "No," he said. "You haven't been right here in weeks. You're somewhere else. You're deciding something and you won't tell me what it is and I don't." He stopped. "Amara, I need you to talk to me." She opened her mouth. And for a second, just a fraction of a second, he thought she was going to say it. Whatever it was. Her eyes changed. She leaned forward slightly. Then she closed her mouth. Sat back. "Paris is just stressing me out," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." He wanted to push. He didn't. 3 days later, he found the suitcase. It was in her room, the door slightly open, and he wasn't snooping. He'd just been walking past. But it was there. Half-packed. Folded clothes. Her second camera. The little things a person takes when they're not coming back quickly. He stood in the hallway. Didn't move for a long time. When she came home that evening, he was sitting in the studio. Not working. Just sitting. "You packed a bag," he said. She set her keys down slowly. "Ji-hoon, you already bought a ticket, didn't you?" he said. Not a question. She didn't answer. Which was an answer. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected it, like some part of him had been waiting for the version of his story where he ended up alone in the studio again. "I just need some time," she said. "I need to figure some things out." "In Paris?" "Yes." He looked at her. "You could have told me." "I know," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I know, Ji-hoon. I'm sorry." She left 2 mornings later. He didn't go to the airport. She didn't ask him to. The studio felt enormous after she was gone. The paper crane sat on the shelf. Her succulent was still in the bathroom. The faint ghost of her shea butter smell clung to the studio couch for almost 2 weeks before it faded. He signed the production contract. He threw himself into work. He told himself this was the natural end of something that was never supposed to be permanent. He told himself that for months. He didn't believe it once. If this story is hitting you in the chest right now, subscribe to this channel because the next batch is going to completely change everything you thought you understood about this story. Drop a comment. What city are you watching from? I want to know. 7 months later, Ji-hoon got an email. It wasn't from Amara directly. It was from the Hangik University Gallery space, a notification about an upcoming photography exhibition. Student and alumni work. Opening night in late October. The exhibition title made him stop. The other room. He stood in his studio reading the email. Outside, Seoul was doing that thing it does in October where the air turns gold and everything looks slightly more serious than it did in summer. He went. Of course he went. The gallery was warm and crowded when he arrived. He kept his head down, hands in his jacket pockets, moving slowly through the early rooms. Other students' work. Interesting stuff. He wasn't really seeing it. Then he turned a corner. And there he was. Photograph after photograph after photograph. Ji-hoon Park, captured in moments he had no idea he was being captured in. Ji-hoon asleep on the studio couch, his notebook still open in his hand. Ji-hoon laughing at the stove with a dish towel over his shoulder. Ji-hoon staring at something off to the left with an expression so unguarded, so completely open, that he barely recognized himself. Ji-hoon with the paper crane in his hands the day she gave it to him. Ji-hoon at the mixing board, headphones on, eyes closed, completely lost in something. The section title on the wall read, "The Boy in the Other Room." He stood there for a long time. People moved around him. He didn't move. The photographs were extraordinary. Not because they were technically perfect, though they were, but because of what they held. Every image looked like something precious, like each moment had been photographed by someone who understood, deeply, that it wouldn't last forever. He was still standing there when the gallery assistant tapped his shoulder and told him there was a live performance about to start. Would he like to move toward the stage area? Ji-hoon looked at the assistant. Is she here? The artist? The assistant smiled. She's backstage. He moved toward the stage. The crowd gathered. A small platform had been set up, just a stool and a microphone and a simple keyboard to the side. Ji-hoon stood at the back. And then someone handed him a keyboard, not a stool and a mic, but the keyboard, and the gallery coordinator leaned over and said quietly, she asked if you'd play. If you came. He looked at the keyboard. She knew I'd come, he asked. She said you would, the coordinator said. She said you always showed up when it mattered. He sat down at the keyboard. He played the song, the one he'd been building since that rainy blackout night, the one that was 40 seconds when he first played it for her. It was 4 minutes now. It had grown in the months without her, the way grief and longing, and something that wasn't quite either of those things tends to grow in empty rooms. The gallery went very quiet. Halfway through, he looked up. Amara was standing at the edge of the stage. She was thinner than he remembered. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing a dark green dress, and her camera was not around her neck, which was the first time he'd ever seen her without it. She was watching him the way she used to watch him in the studio, like she was trying to memorize something. He finished playing. For a moment, nobody made a sound. Then he leaned toward the microphone, something he had not planned to do, and said, simply, "She saved my life." The room responded. Somewhere near the middle, someone started clapping, and it spread quickly. He wasn't looking at the room. He was looking at Amara. And she was crying, not dramatically, just tears moving quietly down her face, her chin up, her eyes on him. Later, backstage, she found him. Or he found her. It happened the way important things sometimes happen. Not with a plan, just with both people moving in the same direction. You played it, she said. You asked me to, he said. She shook her head, slightly. I didn't think you'd actually come. You told them I would, he said. She almost smiled. I was hoping. They stood close, not quite touching. The noise of the gallery was on the other side of the curtain. I have things to tell you, she said quietly. I should have told you a long time ago. Amara. No, wait, she said. Let me say it. I have to say it. She looked at him, opened her mouth, and then her legs gave way. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. She just went. 1 second standing, the next crumpling, and Ji-hoon caught her before she hit the ground, which meant he was kneeling on the gallery floor holding her and saying her name over and over, and people were running, and someone was calling an ambulance, and everything that had been warm and golden 20 seconds ago turned very cold, very fast. The hospital in Mapo was white and fluorescent and smelled like antiseptic, and somewhere down a hallway a machine was beeping with horrible steadiness. A doctor came, spoke to Ji-hoon in Korean, used words that Ji-hoon had heard before in different contexts, but never like this. Never arranged in this particular order about this particular person. Terminally ill. Had known for over a year. Aggressive progression in recent months. Ji-hoon sat in the plastic chair outside her room and put his face in his hands. She had known. Before Seoul. Before the apartment. Before the studio and the ramen and the paper crane and the blackout night when he laughed for the first time in years. She had known. She had come to Seoul knowing. Not to run from it. She hadn't been running from anything. She had come for the opposite reason. She had come because she wanted to live. Fully. Completely. One last season of real living before there were no more seasons. And she had never planned to love him. That part wasn't supposed to happen. He was allowed in to see her. She was awake, propped slightly, looking at him with an expression he now understood. That careful, memorizing look. She had been photographing him with her eyes the entire time. Storing him, keeping him somewhere she could take with her. I was going to tell you, she said. Tonight. I was going to. I know, he said. He sat beside her. He didn't know what to do with his hands. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't want you to love me like I was dying. I wanted you to love me like I was just me. He looked at her for a long time. You are just you, he said quietly. That's not changing. She looked at the ceiling. I have voice notes, she said. On my camera. I made them. In case, she stopped. Okay, he said. Ji-hoon. I know, he said again. She reached over and held his hand, not saying anything, just holding it. Outside the window, Seoul was doing nothing dramatic, just being Seoul. Buildings and lights, and a city full of ordinary life going about its business the way it always does, indifferent and beautiful, completely unaware. They stayed like that for a very long time. Amara Johnson died on a Tuesday morning in November, 23 days after the exhibition, in the same Seoul she had chosen deliberately, purposefully, beautifully, as the place to spend her last season. Ji-hoon found the folder 3 days after. He was going through her camera, the one her friend had brought him with a note from Amara's handwriting on it. For Jae-hoon. He'll know what to do. The folder was labeled in her lowercase, casual way, when I'm gone. Thousands of photos. Videos of the studio nights he'd forgotten. Videos of him working, laughing, arguing with his headphone cord, sleeping on the studio couch with the lamp still on. And voice notes, dozens of them. He sat on the studio floor with her camera and listened. Her voice came through the small speaker like she was still in the apartment, like she'd just stepped into the other room. If you're listening to this, asterisk, she said in the first note, casual, like she was leaving him a reminder about groceries, asterisk, then I ran out of time. I'm sorry about that part. I really am. He sat with his back against the studio couch, the paper crane on the shelf above him, and he didn't move. I like sitting above you, asterisk, another note said, because you always looked at me like I was worth loving. You have no idea what that does to a person, especially a person who was scared she was running out of time to feel that. He pressed the back of his hand to his face. Outside, November Seoul was gray and cold and going about its business. The last voice note was shorter than the others. She must have recorded it near the end, because her voice was quieter, slightly slower, but still completely her. Still warm. The other room, she said, was never the studio, Ji-hoon. A pause. It was the place where you made me forget I was dying. Another pause. Then softer. Don't close the door, just because I had to leave it. 6 months later, Ji-hoon converted the studio. He kept the mixing board. He kept the old lamp. He repainted the walls and brought in more chairs and put up a small sign by the door that he made himself. Not fancy, just clean and honest. The other room, a space for artists. Young musicians came. Photographers. A 17-year-old kid from Itaewon who wrote poetry and had nowhere to record it. A pair of twin sisters from Busan who made folk music on instruments they'd built themselves. Ji-hoon produced tracks and didn't charge most of them anything and didn't explain why. On the wall across from the mixing board, he hung one photograph. Not the most technically perfect one from the exhibition. Not the most beautiful. The one that was slightly blurry. Out of focus just enough to look like a memory rather than a record. Ji-hoon, mid-laugh, looking at something just beyond the camera. Looking at her. At night, when the young artist had gone home and the studio was empty, and Seoul was doing its steady, indifferent, beautiful thing outside the window, Ji-hoon sat at the mixing board with her camera and listened to the voice notes. Not every night, but some nights. And the last thing he heard, always, before he turned off the lamp and locked the door, was her voice coming through the small speaker. Casual, warm, completely her. Don't close the door, just because I had to leave it. He never did. The paper crane is still on the shelf. The succulent, somehow, is still alive. And somewhere in a folder on a camera in a studio in Hongdae, a girl who chose love in her last season is still taking up every single room. Hey, if this story moved you, if you felt even one part of it in your chest, please subscribe to this channel right now, because we tell stories here that stay with you long after they're over. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country. I genuinely want to know who's out there. See you in the next one.